My story starts about 5 years ago, right around February 9th, 2009. I was just finishing up college, and I had come from a background where I was a jazz musician at the time, still in college, and we were coming to play a national act for a show over in Kansas City called the Blue Room, right off 18th and Vine. It was a pretty big show. It was a sellout crowd there that night, and it was a special night for me. One, we get to play with the national act from New York, and two, it was going to be something that changed my life, a night that would change my life for the rest of my life. I didn't realize it. I thought it was just going to be a great performance at the time, but I soon found out that it was going to be something that was going to change my whole outlook on life and what really was important and what was not important for the rest of my life. It just so happened that on that night, we were playing with this guy who was a good friend of my professors. He had actually taught him in high school and middle school, not even knowing that this guy basically idolized his music, his CDs. He would listen to them, he'd transcribe them, put them down to paper, and try to emulate them to the best of his ability. Because any artist knows that that's the best way you can learn how to perform or even do anything, by learning from a master or somebody who's already really good at it. And so he emulated his art, and it just so happened that my professor, Bobby Watson, ended up inviting him out to campus to play a show for us and also do some clinics with us as musicians. For jazz artists, it didn't matter. He was a saxophonist, but it didn't matter what instrument. He could teach you a little something there, whether it was scales, theory, just the business of music and promoting yourself, things like that. But on this particular night, when the show was about to start, I found two people who came and approached me and took me aside, and they told me their names, and at the time, I had no idea who they were. But they said, "Hey, is your name William?" And I said, "Yeah, it sure is." And I thought nothing of it because I figured they were just, some spectators or somebody who were some followers of us, because we get a lot of older people in the older generation, blue-collar workers, lawyers, doctors who come by to watch jazz. It's not something that's so prevalent in this day and age. Most people don't know about it. So I didn't think much about it up until the point where they gave me a letter. They sat down and gave me an envelope, and inside this envelope was a letter, and they said, "We want you to read this. You don't know us, but we know you. You knew our grandson. His name was Christopher Morgan, and he really, really looked up to you, in school, when he was in middle school and high school, and it was something that you have no idea about, but he would always talk to us about, how nice a guy and how great a person you were." And in this letter, I went on to find out that after they told me this, I had some connection with them, but in this letter, it even went more into detail for why they came. The letter talked about how Christopher Morgan, my good friend in middle school and high school, ended up getting his head blown off by a shotgun, double-barrel shotgun, right in front of his head by a drug deal gone bad. He was hanging around the wrong people and ended up getting involved with some bad things, and unfortunately ended up costing him his life. But at that time, I had no idea, the impact that was going to have on me. Neither did I know, that was something that was going to end up changing my life. And when I found out that was the whole reason why they came to find me, it was really neat, because I found out that they had searched my name in the newspaper. They found me out through the newspaper, and they found out that I was a jazz musician, that I was still playing. And they came to personally pat me on the back and say, "Hey, we want to come and meet the guy who played such a huge difference in our grandson's life." We never got to meet him, but we always heard great things about him. Our grandson was raised in a single-parent family. He didn't have much to look up to, but, if he did have some sunlight, we always could, just attest to the fact that he saw something in you. I don't know what it was, but whatever it was, it made him happy, and he knew that he had a friend. And so we just wanted to come and witness the guy who had such a great impact on our grandson's life, and also share that moment with him. Since he's no longer with us, we wanted to share that moment with you tonight. From that point in time, that was something that absolutely broke me down to tears. Our band was at the crux of basically finishing a record deal and also going on to doing a national tour, and also even going international at the time. And it was a very, very controversial point for me, because I was at a point where I had just come into church. I had just figured out some things about the Bible and was really starting to get a love for the Word of God and what it really meant, about how sweet the Word was to your tongue, and how how wonderful it is for your heart to purify and cleanse it from all filthiness of all unrighteousness. And because of that, it was something that was really, really tearing me in both ways. One, music was pulling me one way, but the Word of God was pulling me another, because I finally had a great hunger and a great interest in the Word. And at that time, I had decided that I would make up my mind to no longer pursue music anymore. It had been a long time coming, as a matter of fact, because I had talked to my professor probably about 2 or 3 weeks before that, just telling him how I was contemplating being a family man, and I couldn't see myself going on as a musician. And he told me how he led his life as a musician. As soon as he got out of college, he ended up moving up to New York, living in an apartment where he shared it with 1 or 2 other people, where the rent was about $1,500 a month. And this was back in probably, I don't know, the 90s at that time. And rents even skyrocketed since then. You're talking about like a 1-2 bedroom apartment, $1,500. And the only apartment furniture he had was like steel wire spools that you basically wrap steel wire around. He had those for coffee tables. He had cinder blocks for parts of his couches and things like that, because he couldn't afford to do anything else. But he was so determined to fulfill this goal that he dragged his soon-to-be wife into this, as well as his child. To me, that was a red flag telling me that there's nothing worth losing my life, my family over so much just to follow and pursue a goal of music like that. And I had no idea, how it was all going to come about, but it was just something that was tearing at me at the time when I was talking to my professor. And then it kind of really came to a head then when I found out that couple who came and visited me out the Blue Room that night, February 9, 2009. Since that time, though, it made me go and tell my professor, my parents, just about everyone around me, that I was no longer going to play, no longer going to perform, because it wasn't anything that was truthfully of God. If you know anything about jazz, you know that jazz itself is, the root word means to have sex, or sex. And I had no idea at the time, but it was something that I was promoting and pushing, and I was basically a promoter for sex and fornication. I mean, some of the greatest jazz musicians were dope heads, fornicators, drug addicts. When it comes down to it, Charlie Parker, John Coltrane, Wayne Shorter. Those are just a few of the names. Dizzy Gillespie, and the majority of them didn't have much to look forward to except for the music, nightlife, and just going on from gig to gig. And that was something I knew I didn't want to pursue and follow anymore. And thank God that happened to me, and it's been the greatest thing that has happened to me because of that. And I found out very quickly that there are some definite things that I needed to know. In jazz, one of the most important things you find out is you need to learn how to improvise, to make things up on the spot. But in the Bible, you find that there's things that are concrete, that never change, that you won't have to make up things about, because they won't change. And they're so secure, they're so set, that it's like the sun rising and the moon setting. And it was something that was a great comfort to me. And one of the great verses I heard and that I learned the first time that I really got a thirst and a hunger for the Word of God was over in 1 John 5:12, that stated, "He that hath the Son hath life. He that hath not the Son of God hath not life." And that was so simple that it absolutely changed my life, because it wasn't complicated. And I found out that God doesn't complicate things, He simplifies them. And I had too many other things clogging up my arteries, clogging up my mind. I had a filthy imagination, a filthy heart, and I'm working on those things to this day. But I had to put those things aside, because music was my idol, and I realized it was taking over my life and keeping me from God. And I was a guy who was raised in church my entire life for the most part. My parents still allowed me to go out and play at jazz gigs. I'd have gigs that start on Saturday morning at 1 in the morning. Basically, this is Sunday morning, actually. And they finish at 5 a.m. Sunday morning. I'd come back home from the gigs, and my parents would still allow me to go to church the following morning, after I had already been out with drunkards and other people who were coming from the clubs at that ungodly hour. I'd fall asleep for 2 or 3 hours, get up and play on Sunday morning service while I'm nodding off in the service and things like that. And my parents allowed it at the time, and I see the foolishness in that, but they wanted me to pursue my goal. But thank God that God saw fit to take me out of that, and that He didn't allow me to go on in my foolishness and my ignorance. So that's just a little bit of my testimony there, and I pray that it was a blessing to you. And God, I ask the Lord that He bless you and keep you and look after you